All right, so we've finally gotten there where the start of World War II. Our kind of big players are very similar to those from World War I. Big players are going to include Britain, France, Germany, the USSR, which is the same, similar to the Soviet Union and Russia. Then also Japan, and we have kind of this interaction with China in Manchuria as well. So let's start. As we left Japan, Japan seemed, I think the slides are here, Japan seemed to be creating a democracy in the 1920s. But we have the Great Depression, and that basically kind of gets in the way of all of the progress that they were making. And so in the 1920s, because their economy crashes, the people in Japan blamed the democratic government during the Great Depression. So in 1931, and as we see in this slide, what had happened is we had an emperor that had ruled for years and years and years and years. But then what ended up happening was we kind of moved towards this democratic nation, and we want to move back to the emperor. We have this call to kind of go back to traditional values. Here we have the emperor as well as the prime minister of Japan during that time. So in 1931, so this is kind of one of like the first things, and it's kind of debatable as to whether this is the true start of World War II. People will say different things started World War II, but there's an argument to be made that invading Manchuria, being that they were kind of consistently fighting, and holding that land versus China is kind of the first real thing that we would say, okay, this is part of World War II. So they invaded Manchuria, which is a province of China. And we will remember, so this is Japan, and then here is Manchuria. So they go and they attack, they have Korea, which we will obviously, I guess not obviously, we will study more and talk more about Korea. Same Korea as like North Korea and Kim Jong-un. And then so they go and they invade Manchuria. Now, the League of Nations was an organization founded after World War I specifically to stop international conflicts, to be a place that countries can go to figure out, all right, let's not have a gigantic world war. Here's the issue. They basically say, so first, why is Japan even doing this? Well, they didn't have any raw materials. They're an island nation, and so things like oil and trees, all sorts of things that you need to build an army, they just don't have. It's very similar to Britain, which is also, we have a map of Britain on, which is also an island nation and needs to have other places if they are really trying to have the natural resources that they need in an industrialized economy. So they invade Manchuria in order to get natural resources as well as markets to sell their goods. And shortly thereafter, in order to reach their imperialist goals, what did I say? They had to invade, I guess. Invade. You could say colonize. You could say take over. But I'm going to go with invade. Japan. One second. All right, I had to pause it because I missed a line. So the League of Nations demanded that they leave. All right, the League of Nations gets together. They pass a resolution that says, you need to get out of Manchuria. This is a war of aggression. This is not justified by international law. You need to leave. Japan just says, no, we're just not going to do that. So Japan refused and left the League of Nations, said, we don't care. We're out. And left the League of Nations. The key, and this we're going to see this throughout the next little bit, the League of Nations did not have power to enforce decisions. It didn't have a League of Nations army. There was nothing binding about what the League of Nations said. So when the League of Nations said, do something, do this, that, or the other, a country just goes, no, we're just not gonna. What are you going to do about it, League of Nations? And basically, that's what happens here moving into World War II. The League of Nations does not basically enforce any of its decisions, and these countries realize that they're not going to enforce these decisions. So Mussolini saw that the League of Nations could not stop Japan. And so I think we're down here, right? And so he, as it says on the slide, wanted to create this Italian empire. So he looks around and he says, okay, well, we're right here. So there, let's remember, Italy is down here. This is where, wait, oh, come on, where are the maps? Italy's like right up here. So it's relatively close to Ethiopia. So he wanted to create an Italian empire. It's like, oh, think of all the pride of the time of the Romans, things like that. And so Mussolini successfully invaded Ethiopia. And this was I don't want to say a one-sided fight, but I will say a one-sided fight. The Ethiopians are using like bows and arrows, and it's like versus tanks. It's like bows and arrows and cavalry, like on fighting on horseback with spears and bows and arrows versus like legit tanks and planes and stuff. So it's like a quite one-sided fight. And again, the Ethiopian Empire the emperor asks the League of Nations for help, but they don't do anything. So they, again, do nothing to stop it. Nothing to stop it. Now, we get to Hitler. And so Hitler promised that he would undo, basically rip apart, start from scratch the Treaty of Versailles. And so in 1935, he announced, he just says, we're not going to obey the treaty. Follow the treaty. We are just not following this anymore. We're done. And so there are several limits. We're going to talk about a lot of them. There are several limits imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, limiting Germany's military, saying where Germany could or could not go. They had to pay reparations. They weren't allowed to unite with Austria back into one country. So there were all of these limits in the Treaty of Versailles. We're going to go over all of the important ones. But keep in mind, there's a set of things that Germany's not allowed to do that are in this treaty, and Hitler just says we're not going to obey it. One of these limits was to limit Germany's military, as I said. And as part of this, he starts building up his military, all right, beyond or above the levels that are prescribed in the treaty. I don't remember the exact numbers. I think it might be that they're allowed to have a maximum army of 100,000 people, but do not quote me on that. I'm not sure. I would have to look it up, and I don't have time between now and the next class to look it up. I think it's 100,000, though. And so he just starts building an army that's bigger than that. Again, I hope we're noticing of a theme. Again, the League of Nations did nothing. They hardly protested. And so, as you know, I know in class, right, when you don't come down as a teacher against a student, maybe for breaking such and such rule, all you are doing is inviting further breaking of the rules. So sometimes when I come down hard on somebody or whatever, it's because if I don't do something about it, people are just going to keep breaking the rules, right? And so Hitler, after seeing this, decides, okay, well, they're not going to do anything about the military. And just as a quick aside, there is a strong argument that what should have happened is right when he started breaking the treaty, they should have invaded and taken him over and said, look, well, you're breaking the treaty, so we're coming in and dismantling this military. But they didn't, because nobody wanted another world war. All these countries had just gotten done fighting and dying in a gigantic world war, and there was no appetite for anybody to start a big old fight again. The problem is, if you let this grow and grow and grow, it can become even more powerful, and that's what we're going to see here at the start of World War II. So, what happens? Hitler moves his army into the Rhineland, which is this area right here. This area right here. He moves his army into the Rhineland. And so the point is, this was supposed to be demilitarized, meaning that there's not supposed to be any German soldiers in this area. And why would you do that? Well, you don't want Germany to be able to attack France or Belgium or the Netherlands as they did in World War I with this sweeping maneuver, or to attack France over its border with France. And so that's the idea of having that be a demilitarized zone. However, and meaning like no soldiers are allowed in there. However, he moved his soldiers into the Rhineland. Okay, interesting. He moves his soldiers into the Rhineland, and the French were obviously surprised and probably not exactly pleased about this, but required it to be what's called demilitarized, and again, that means no soldiers in there. Again, the League of Nations did nothing. again, the League of Nations did nothing. We are going to pause there and do another video because I think that's the bell.